Are we on the air?
Am I on the air?
You're on the air?
On the air 24/7. Your news talk giant, TNT.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. We're still in hour number one of this live broadcast. Great to see the community in the TNT chat room. Great to see you guys there. Go to tntradio.live, lower right-hand corner. You'll see the red bubble. That's where all the action is during the broadcast. Seeing the numbers build up in there over the last week has been fantastic. Great to see everybody migrating over to our new time slot here, which is slightly later than where we were broadcasting for the last year. But great to see you guys coming through there. Let's see some familiar faces as well. I'll try to interact with you guys later in the program. Now let's switch gears back to the United States. We'll actually go directly to the Beltway right now and welcome our next guest onto the stage. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. military. He's also the head of defense priorities, and he is the host of Deep Dive with Daniel Davis on YouTube. He's joining us on the live link right now. Danny, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you, Danny, and this topic, which everybody is talking about right now. I know you're pretty well placed to comment on what's happening, why it's happening, and where you think this is headed. This has turned into quite a political drama, Danny, but I'm trying to separate the politics from the sort of geopolitics on this, because I know there's this thing going on in Congress, which has a lot of political careers and political capital sunk into it. And then I know there's the geostrategic aspect of where the United States wants to be globally. On this funding controversy, they're wanting to split this up. Speaker Johnson might lose his job over this. He says he's doing the right thing. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, I think we need to separate the politics from the reality, which are not the same thing in this case. Let me just tell you, militarily, all of this hand-wringing about so many of the advocates of this, from Chuck Schumer when he passed the Senate version of this to President Biden when he's making emphatic appeals to pass it, they are dead wrong. This will not make any difference on the battlefield. I've seen a lot of commentators actually go so far as to say that the Ukraine losing and going starting to falter is because this bill won't be passed. And I can just tell you, militarily, it is not even related. There are many practical, significant reasons on the battlefield why this is happening. But when you kind of take a look at the bill itself and you actually see what it's going to buy and how much money it actually provides, the fiction becomes quickly apparent, because a majority of this money, or at least a large portion of it, is going to DOD to replace backfill stuff, not going to Ukraine, but to replace storage and armaments and weapons that we've already given to backfill what we lost. Then another chunk is going to the European Command in Europe, our ground troops on the ground, to help them operation, i.e. nothing to do with Ukraine. Then you have $13.8 billion is what's actually going to buy weapons and stuff. And on a bigger scale, that may sound like a big number, but in comparison, it's minuscule. It won't hardly do anything to redress the 1 to 10 disparity they have in troops, about the 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, depending on where on the front line, disparity in artillery, and even worse than that in air and air defense and drone strikes, all of which are heavily weighted on the Russian side, and this won't undo any of that. So that's the reality, despite what any of the supporters want to claim.
Now, I know yourself, Colonel Douglas McGregor, Larry Johnson, former CIA operative. You guys have been very active on independent media, on your own programs as well, basically saying this, what you just said, laying this out really for a very long time now, the better part of a year at least, saying that this is really a fool's errand continuing any further with sinking more capital into Ukraine and really kind of leading Ukraine itself as a country, possibly down the garden path on this, because there's not even a Pyrrhic victory to be had. There's no military solution to this. I think you guys have all, articulated this over and over very clearly, but still, Danny, in Washington, there's still this political dimension to the Ukraine issue that just occupies so many people's minds. And it's almost as if this is a sort of, there's no available face-saving option for Washington on Ukraine, other than somebody has to stand up and say, we might have made a catastrophic mistake here. I mean, where can we go from here, especially in an election year, Danny?
I suspect that probably you're going to see Speaker Johnson come across and find a way to get this bill passed, especially the Ukraine portion of it, because he's being set up right now as a scapegoat, because so many on the other side are, and this is not just the right and the left, but this is those who advocate for Ukraine, which are on both sides of the aisle, because they're trying to put the blame on him, saying Ukraine is losing because you won't pass this bill, even though there's no truth in it. And so if he doesn't pass the money, which on the policy side makes sense, he shouldn't do it, because it's literally just throwing 60 billion American dollars into the toilet, because it's not going to change any outcome. So they shouldn't do this. That's on a reaction. But if he doesn't, then all these people who have been saying all along that if we just needed this money and Ukraine can win, will say, I told you. See, he didn't do it and Ukraine ended up losing, because that's going to happen whether they give the money or not. I bet Johnson will pass this so that they can't say that, and he'll give the money. And now I don't know what their story is going to be then, because they will fail. The Ukraine side cannot win this war. They can't even avoid defeat on the current trend lines. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But the sad part is, and the thing that makes me angry, is that the Ukraine people are going to pay the price for this, because this money will allow the fiction to go on a little longer and allow them to keep fighting, but it won't change the outcome. It'll just mean more Ukrainian men are going to die, more Ukrainian cities will get rubbled.
Wow, this is an expensive can to kick down the road, but eventually they're going to have to come to some kind of negotiated settlement. Danny, do you think there's going to be noises from either the Trump or the Biden camp that the talks are going to happen before the election? Because that's a big piece for the general election. I mean, this is a major foreign policy piece. Do you think there'll be an announcement of something move in that direction?
Well, yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of the dilemma for the Biden administration, because I think that he would love nothing more than to make sure that this issue gets kicked down to the road to about, I don't know, November 6th or something like that, just on the other side of the election. Then they can deal with whatever. He doesn't want to have any negotiations or any talk. He wants to keep the fiction alive going on, and all of the supporters for the Democratic Party, because any talk of a negotiated settlement now, which is rationally what we should be doing, like this afternoon, not waiting until November to save the people that we claim to want to defend, the Ukrainian people. But because we don't, then the trends are going to keep going on. And I think there's a better than 50-50 shot that the Ukraine army will finally break before that time. And you talk about a bad political move. You've been saying all the time, we're going to be with Ukraine as long as it takes. And now all of a sudden, everything NATO has done for, it'll be, who knows, what, 2.5 years by that point, will have been shown to be feckless. And finally, the Russians, who we demonize all this time and talk about how bad they are, eventually end up having a tactical success and a victory that can't be hidden over anymore. But if they do the right thing, then of course you can count on the right to jump all over it and say, this is evidence that you were bad and it's going to have negative electoral ramifications. But I just wish that the Biden administration would do the right thing and just let the chips fall where they may, because again, the bill payers are the people of Ukraine.
Well, you just brought up a vision in my head here, Danny, of something between now and the election, that if the permanent state, especially the Biden administration, don't want to see any negotiations on this side of the election, are we going to get bludgeoned with Russian fear-mongering stories, Trump-Russia stories in the run-up to the election? Because wouldn't that keep the fiction going long enough?
Well, we're already getting World War III visions already passed on. They're saying, oh, my God, we have to stop him. If we don't, Russia's coming after us next. They're going to come after NATO. And I mean, everyone from Jens Stoltenberg to everybody in the administration, John Kirby. I mean, all these people are saying that's what's at stake here. And there's nothing to that at all. There's no truth to that whatsoever. It doesn't even matter if Putin actually did want to do that. He doesn't. But if he did, he doesn't have the capacity. So there is literally no danger of Putin going. And you don't have to look any further than the battlefield, because right now, for the last couple of months, Russia has been trying to take this place called Chasiv Yar. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a village of about 12,000 people, and it's taken them a long time to get that. The idea that Russia could have this much trouble with Bakhmut and Avdiivka, which took them 9 to 12 months to take, that they're suddenly going to go into a Western country and take a major city or something and roll into NATO countries is laughable if you look at the capabilities. But nobody does look at it. They just look at the name Russia. He's coming after us, and that generates fear, and that's all it is.
So we have a clip from Speaker Johnson here. We played this in a previous segment. I think we're going to air it again because I want to get your reaction to this, because he does pack a lot into this very short statement. We've got a piece of his statement to the press in the last 24 hours. Let's go ahead and roll that. I want to get Daniel Davis's reaction to this clip. Go ahead and roll this clip.
But I'm doing here what I believe to be the right thing. I think providing lethal aid to Ukraine right now is critically important. I really do. I really do believe the intel and the briefings that we've gotten that I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might have a showdown with Poland or one of our NATO allies. To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys. My son is going to begin in the Naval Academy this fall. This is a live fire exercise for me, as it is so many American families. This is not a game. It's not a joke. We can't play politics of this. We have to do the right thing.
Danny, what do you think of this?
Okay. Well, I believe him in that he said, I believe the intelligence. I believe what I'm being told. He has no idea himself. But when all he hears is all these so-called experts telling him all this stuff, I mean, if I hadn't studied this myself and, been for decades in the service and fought in armored warfare and led other men in training for it, I might not know either. But I do, and I have fought in these situations, so I have direct knowledge that it's insane what they're saying, but yet that's what passes. And so he's going, gosh, I guess we better give them bullets so it's not American boys. I mean, that briefs well, but there's no truth to that. There's no American boys are going to go fight for Ukraine or fight for any other reason, because Russia's not going to, they're not stupid. Russia's not stupid. They're not going to take on a 32-member military alliance on an offensive action. I mean, it would be suicide to do that. And then, of course, it would go nuclear. It wouldn't even be so much conventional. There's no truth to it. And he's talking about doing the right thing. I genuinely believe, as a person, he probably thinks that's the right thing because he believes what he's being told. The problem is what he's being told isn't true.
And this isn't the second time he's invoked the quote intelligence in a week. He just said he came out of a skiff on the FISA bill. He was one way on the FISA bill, and then after being briefed by the intelligence community about the ticking bomb scenario or whatnot in the skiff, he changed his mind and basically gave it an extension. That was something that a lot of Republicans, including the Freedom Caucus, had basically wanted to see the back of for the longest time. But yet he's extended that. So is it a case that in Washington, Daniel, that the intelligence community, maybe they can identify certain politicians that are more, let's say, impressionable when it comes to showing them intelligence scenarios of what could have happened? Because you see some of these briefings later on WikiLeaks or later in history when they're released from the archive, and you can see there's a lot of speculation scenarios, but that's different than actual ticking bomb scenarios. But what do you think?
Yeah.
How impressionable are congressmen in this position?
Yeah, I can't speak to any of the stuff that he has been faced because I don't know who was giving it to him. I don't know what their motivations may have been, but I can tell you that I have had direct experience during my time in one of my deployments in Afghanistan, actually a couple of them, where I know because a friend of mine was an intelligence officer, one of the mid-level guys who were working some of the deals to bring the intelligence to the senior leaders. And I will never forget, he was on Petraeus' staff, and there was a general that was getting ready to receive the brief before Petraeus did. And this guy goes on the ground and he starts telling him in the pre-brief what the truth of the ground is, what the Taliban is doing, what they're not doing. And the general cuts him off mid-sentence, and he said, that's not true at all, because it didn't match what Petraeus already believed, what he was going to tell the American people. He said, that's not true. Go back and rewrite it. And he said everybody on the intelligence staff who knew the truth of what that guy had said it was demoralizing, because they know now that when Petraeus comes in a few hours from then, it's going to be sanitized to tell him what he wanted to hear, which wasn't the truth. So there are people on the intel side that will politicize anything because it's what's needed. You don't need to go to weapons of mass destruction in 2003 to figure that part out. But there are so many great intelligence workers and analysts who do give the right stuff. But when it gets up to the policy level, it gets misused a lot more than you think.
And that's what retired intelligence professionals have told us in previous segments, is that the raw intelligence, the data is sound, but then it gets cherry picked. Certain things get selected because they have certain political agendas or even other agendas attached to them. And then that's what basically becomes the narrative.
If truth is like, oh, if that gets out, that will not support my policy here, so just suppress that part. That's the other part.
So, and again, it's not necessarily the intelligence professionals. They're doing their job. Right. They're gathering things. It's when it becomes political at that level that everything changes. So I think this could be a problem in Washington that a lot of people will say is getting, it's kind of getting worse in recent years. And certainly we can point to a lot of escapades of people like John Brennan and others that have been kind of mired in some of these sort of scandals, or the intelligence
Patrick,
community
one of the problems is that there's not enough people in Congress who know on their own what right looks like, and they don't have enough independent knowledge. They only know what they're being told. If you have more people that are experienced, whether it's intelligence or military analysts or practitioners who have personal knowledge. So when you tell me something, I may have to look to see the intel, but I know when something doesn't sound right, and I'll know when to dig. But these people don't have any idea. And you see it, somebody in the, in the skiff, in the classified area telling you something, you rationally want to believe them. You don't want to think they're lying. And especially if you don't have any knowledge, you just can't challenge it. And that gives so much power to whoever is the one giving these briefings when they have an audience that they don't know if they're telling the truth or not.
And so you look at this right now, how it's built up. So 6 months ago, 7 months ago, it was all about Ukraine. This was the big ticket item for funding, for spending and support and so forth. Then October 7th happens, and then Israel comes forward, and now they're sort of in the front of the queue. And also you have this issue with Taiwan, which is the sort of potential third front that the Biden administration said they're prepared to be fighting on three fronts. So now we have this whole thing built up right now. And how sustainable is this going forward? Something has to break amongst all this, Daniel. What do you think?
Yeah, what I'd like to see break is the foolishness of going down any of these paths. We don't need to be at war with any of these people. We need to be tamping them down. We need to end the Russia-Ukraine war and be hard with our friend in Kiev and say, you're not going to win this war. We don't even have enough stuff to help you win it, even if you had the men, which they don't. So let's end that war. We should tell Iran or Israel, if you even toy with going to war with Iran, you're on your own, because that's not our fight. We have no interest in that, and we would do nothing but lose if we did. And then you talk about Russia, Taiwan, and China. I'm telling you, we cannot win a war against China in the Taiwan area, no matter what anybody wants to think. And all kinds of computer exercises have validated this point and shown the extraordinary cost to the United States. That should change our policies so we do things different and don't go down a path that could end in a conflict that we might lose. It's insane the way we're doing these things. So I want to see sanity come into all of our operations here instead of this fiction that we have that we can literally do everything everywhere. And I'll tell you, one of the first long pole in the tent is ammunition, artillery shells, missiles, and interceptors for air defense. Those are some of the three key things that we keep giving away to Ukraine and to Israel. And if we should need them anywhere in a fight of our own, we're going to have too few of them, and we can't even sustain a combat operation, especially in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, and see, now you're getting down to the nub of the issue, Daniel, because all of this sort of defense deterrence, the philosophy of how we've built up defenses in Europe, interoperability, Israel, you talked about the Iron Dome and some of these other arrays that they rely on, and also in Taiwan as well. They weren't envisioning, a sustained fighting for,
Exactly.
6 months or a year. Before, it was Air Force shock and all airstrikes and maybe a couple of days, maybe a few weeks that you'd have to be reloading all these systems. All of that has basically transformed now based on what we've seen in Ukraine with Russia. So they have to rethink the entire approach to all of this. And is that rethinking
Absolutely.
going on right now?
It doesn't appear to be. Now, one can hope that behind the scenes it is, but when you look at actions, it's not, because we should be putting the brakes big time on anything about going to Ukraine right now, because you see that the Iron Dome operated fantastic on the April when Iran launched its counterstrike to its embassy being hit, and it was fabulous, 99%. That's great, but that's only working as long as you have the interceptor missiles. Iran has tens of thousands of these drones that could saturate the Israeli air defense if they wanted to. And all of a sudden, they're going to run out of interceptor missiles, and there's nothing to stop these drones or other missiles from coming in after that. Israel is a lot more vulnerable than they think, but so are we. That's the note for us, that this proliferation of drones all over the place, and I assure you that China's noticing this, and they are ramping up big time their drone production, because they know that our interceptor missiles, some of which cost $3.5 million a pop for an interceptor missile in the PAC-3 system, they can send a $30,000 drone. $1 million worth of them saturates your defense and it's gone. And so we have to do some big time changes. But right now, we're not even slowing down giving the missiles away. And so that's not smart for us, and we should change.
No, absolutely. I think a full rethink on the whole approach with the U.S. military-industrial complex. There's a reckoning for this. This is as perfect as time as ever to make this the big conversation. So we hope that the work that you're doing and some of your colleagues are helping to stimulate some of that conversation. Certainly in Washington, I think it is. I think based on the numbers, and this is another thing that's incredible, the amount of reach that yourself and some of your other sort of independent media, military and intelligence colleagues, Judge Napolitano, and some of the people appearing on these programs, you're having an impact on the conversation. I think the ideas are permeating, although slowly. I think they are permeating, because we're starting to see some of these conversations in a delayed reaction from the conversations you're having in the independent media starting to come out.
I think part of the reason, Peter's, I'm sorry, is because, like, for example, on the mainstream media, you have David Petraeus is always on all these major television channels. Well, he went on in late May of 2023, just before Ukraine launched this big offensive. And he went and told everybody that they were going to break the Russian defense. It was going to crumble. They were going to go to the Azov Sea, and all these great things about the Ukraine side that they had, and they knew how to penetrate minefields. Everything they didn't know how to do. And I had written that it was nonsense and it was a disaster in the making before it happened. Then the expected happened. But did anybody go back to Petraeus on the major mainstream media and say, hey, you said this and the opposite happened? No, they asked him back again. And I think people are starting to go, man, y'all keep giving bad advice, and you were in charge of Afghanistan, which is disaster. And that's why I think they're looking at channels like mine and Judge Napolitano and Douglas McGregor, because they see their things they say are matching up with what they see. And until that starts changing on the mainstream media, I think they're going to keep bleeding customers.
Well, I think not to single out David Petraeus, but he's clearly, you don't know if he's selling anything or not. That's the problem with some of these people. Whereas yourself, Douglas McGregor, Ray McGovern, you guys aren't selling anything. You're offering wisdom for free into the public domain. So I think the audiences are catching on to this, and I think this is why I think your numbers are growing. I just got a couple of minutes left on this situation right now. We got this tense standoff standoff between Israel and Iran. Iran has said if Israel strikes within Iran, Iran's going to hit back 10 times harder than they did on April 14th. Do you think that is a deterrence that is going to hold coming from Iran on this? Do you think Iran has reset the escalation ladder in the Middle East? Where do you think the region's at? Is this his historic change right now?
It has every possibility of being a historic change. It already is the fact that Israel had pretty much had a free hand to do whatever they want. A lot of people don't know that there were 17 assassinations of senior Iranian officials prior to the 1 April attack on their embassy, and Iran had basically done nothing in retaliation. They had just kind of sucked it down. This is the time they went with an attack in a way that they knew would be shot down, but that they did it, and they've shown that there is a limit to how far they can be pushed. If Israel pushes that line much further, then they may find that Iran's ability to strike is much higher than they thought, and their willingness to do so is to take risk is worse. And we don't need to find out if they mean that or not, and I think that Israel recognizes they actually have a vulnerability that this 199% success rate showed was great, but they know they can do math, and they know that they can't stand up if they actually hit hard. And I hope it does change, because otherwise it's going to change for the worse, and we could actually have a regional war.
If there was escalation, we got a minute left, is it good or bad for the incumbent president in Washington?
It's bad for America, point blank. Nobody would benefit from it, and it would risk killing American soldiers. And I don't care, election year or not election year, that's a terrible thing. And there's nothing to gain. And all we have to do is just do normal stuff and not attack and provoke unnecessarily, and everything's going to be fine. But when we do these kinds of things, it provokes a response that's predictable.
Well, let's hope there's an incentive at the White House anyway to not see escalation and at least get us through to the next side of this story in 2025 without any more collateral damage. I think we've seen enough.
Totally agree.
I think we've seen enough there. Daniel Davis, host of the Deep Dive on YouTube, retired Lieutenant Colonel and the head of Defensive Priorities. Thank you very much for joining us on TNT.
By the way, I'm a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. I'm definitely not the head of it. I just want to be clear on that.
A senior fellow, sir. Stand corrected on that. Danny Davis. And do follow Danny on social media and also his show if you want to stay up to date on these and related issues. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Daniel Davis. Look, we've got a whole lot more. We're going to talk to George Papadopoulos in the next hour. That's going to be an interesting conversation for sure. And again, stay with us. Top of the hour news headlines coming here on TNT. And we got a whole lot more, so you want to stay right there. We'll be back in a few.